From battlefield to bomb shelter, from home front to hospital, from volunteer rosters to victims lists, women experience war in distinctive, gendered ways. These are their stories. These are their voices. Welcome to Voices of Women at Wartime, a podcast by the Center for Women's Justice in Israel. I'm Rachel Stomel.
And I'm Rivka Lubitch. Before we start today, I would like to mention that this episode is dedicated to my beloved mother, Alea HaShalom, Sarah, in English Carol, Liebman, who passed away just 2 weeks ago after a long illness. And thank you, Frida Givon, for donating towards this episode in my mother's name, Le'ilui Nishmata. Just a few words about my mom. She was a very special woman, other than being my mother, of course. Self-made, extremely active and energetic, a lover of Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel, who tried all her life to keep the word of God and to bring happiness to others. She was a feminist, a very religious and devoted Jew, and she was extremely proud of all my work at the Center for Women's Justice. I pray to be able to walk in her footsteps. But I also am not forgetting that in these hard times, we must thank God that she lived her life in full, had children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. As we were having my mother's funeral, there was a funeral of a soldier taking place nearby, and it reminded us of how thankful we should be. May her memory be blessed.
Thank you, Rivka, for sharing about your mother. Your mother has a lot to be proud of in you, and I hope you find comfort in her memory. It's good to have you back on the podcast.
Thanks.
I think it's safe to say that everyone in this country has experienced trauma in some way. And if you think you haven't, that's probably a trauma response too. Trauma affects us all in different ways. And today we're going to be talking about how trauma affects kids. Kids are still developing and growing. Their experiences, their environments, and their reactions to people around them have a profound impact on who they are and who they will become, and what kind of coping mechanisms they'll develop that'll shape their personalities and their life choices. That means that right now, the approaches we use to relate to their trauma is really significant and impactful. I know this is something that I've thought a lot about as a mom of kids ranging from toddler to teenager, but even if you're not a parent, anyone who comes into contact with kids, whether that's teachers, caregivers, certainly therapists, even just people in casual social settings where kids are around, we should all be concerned about the way this generation of kids is being shaped by what's going on around them. And because of that, we need to be intentionally thinking about the perspectives we can adopt that will help kids get through this in healthy ways. I'm really excited to introduce Lisa Fliegel to our podcast today. Lisa is an embedded trauma therapist, and we'll get to what that means soon, who worked with kids from the southern kibbutzim who were directly affected by the massacres on October 7th. And what's really unique about Lisa is that she's worked with kids in 3 very different high conflict zones: in Israel, in Northern Ireland, and in inner city Boston dealing with homicides. So all these experiences have given her a really fascinating perspective, which she's written about in her book, Bulletproof Therapist.
Lisa currently lives in Boston, but she grew up here in Kibbutz Keturah in the south of Israel. After October 7th, she came back here not only to help these kids, but as a trauma expert to train the other therapists and counselors who were working with them too. It sounds like a monumental task to undertake, one that requires a lot of personal resilience and a high level of professional expertise. We're honored to have you here. Thanks, Lisa, for coming on the show. You can say hello.
Oh, good. I love when people tell me what I can do, because you don't know what the rules are when you meet a new person. No, you don't need to apologize, because everything we do is a parallel process. In times of trauma, there's a parallel process between the way systems function and the kind of symptoms that individuals show. And one of the keys to managing trauma is to be able to identify when a reaction or a response is based on personal trauma, or when it reflects the overall behavior of the systems. It mirrors the systems. Our systems mirror the individuals we work with. And so I responded that way, not because there's something you should have done differently, but in order to reflect back that it characterizes trauma, that all the rules and structures and symptoms we knew to be true are shattered. And so it's more important than ever to have clarity of what the framework is and what the expectation is. Everything that I do as an embedded therapist combines form and content. So I'm going to demonstrate that, not just demonstrate, but also say to you, Rivka, my condolences, and I'm honored to be in your presence and hear about your mother, who sounds like an amazing woman.
Thank you. Thank you. That's amazing.
I mean that sincerely, and I'm touched by it. And I'm also using that to demonstrate that when we go into a situation like post-October 7th, we have in our mind what our mission is. We're like, this is what these people went through. Oh my God, it's so overwhelming. What can I possibly do? Who am I? That's what's on our mind. But people are still people, and people are still who they were before October 7th. And so we can't ignore that. If I were to start talking and ignore the fact that you said your mother passed away 2 weeks ago, what kind of trauma therapist would I be? But because of our hyper-focusing, and hyper-focusing is also a symptom of trauma, because we hyper-focus on the most dramatic thing, then our attention can be veered away by things that are very important. Now, the other thing about this is that trauma is about a fracture of relationship. All the relationships that people had with their country, with each other, with the Jewish state, with the notion of a Jewish state, with the notion of a Jewish world, were fractured on October 7th. The idea that we have a Jewish army that protects us, the idea that the government needs to be there to help and support us, the idea that our community can protect us, the idea that we can protect our children. All of those vulnerabilities denied a certain invincibility that we have as Jews today, because having our own country in a way makes us invincible. So if I were to ignore the fact that that you've gone through this very meaningful and important life event, I would be violating a basic premise of relationship, that we have to acknowledge each other and we have to be present with the person that we're with. That doesn't go away. One of the things that I kind of have an issue with is that we call October 7th Pearl Harbor or 9/11. Like, we were looking for the most bombastic, dramatic world event.
Actually, we call it the Shoah, but okay, in Israel.
Right. And we call it the Shoah. Right. And the fact that I left that out says something about me, doesn't it? And the reason I bring it up is because we think we are telling the world what we need. We are telling the world how monumental the experience was by using those historic events. On the other hand, what we end up doing, based on my experience and based on the reactions of the world, is those events are far away, and those events are really, really big. They're really big, and they're almost otherworldly, which is what October 7th was. But for other people who we want to have compassion and empathy for us, it's not the size of the event. It's the relatability of the event to the event that we want. So it's almost saying the Boston Marathon bombing. Okay, that can seem absurd, right? Because 4 people died, 5 people died, maybe 7 people died. But the surprise and the shock of it being in the midst of a regular day, and a happy day, a day where we were celebrating, the city of Boston. This is our event. The Boston Marathon puts us on the world map.
Before we ask you about children, I want to ask you, what exactly is an embedded trauma therapist? Because I wasn't sure about that term.
Okay, thank you. And I always welcome being pulled back because, as Rachel said, I've been in a lot of trauma zones and my mind goes to all those places all the time. So thank you for anchoring me. And, in my own parallel process of vicarious traumatization, I also need anchoring. So you are being what we call trauma informed. And that answers your question. What does it mean to be embedded? It means that you are within the society where the triggering event is happening, where the ongoing reverberations from the triggering event are still echoing. And the way I describe it is, if you think of a war photographer is embedded in the battlefield, and their photographs are significant. Their photographs give us a message and depict a reality that we wouldn't otherwise have access to. And so the war photographer has a great responsibility to be able to, in one picture, depict a whole battlefield. And as an embedded therapist, like the war photographer, I am in the trenches. I am in the trenches where the impact of the triggering event is echoing, but I am present in what we call a trauma-informed way, which means that everything that is said and done in the trench I am in at the time, I interpret from a trauma lens. And what does that mean? It means I don't react to what people say and do. I interpret the meaning of it in the context of trauma. What does that mean? It means I don't react to what they say. I reflect back to them what I perceive them to be communicating.
Can you give us an example of what that would look like?
Sure. When I was in the lobby of the Yam Suf Hotel one day, which is where Nir Oz and Kerem Shalom had been evacuated to, Elad had 60,000 evacuees, and they were each in a different hotel. And one of the things that surprised me is that the team that deployed to work with these people did not call the hotels by the name of the hotel. They called the hotels by the name of the kibbutz that was in the hotel. So my first day there, they said, "Oh, we're going to Nirim." And I said, "Nirim? I thought that was a closed military zone. How can they go to Nirim?" And she said, "No, Nirim is in this hotel." And I was like, "You idiot." Of course, And so Malon Yam Suf was Nir Oz. We called it Nir Oz. And so one day I was sitting in the lobby, and these kids were having a pillow fight with the cushions from the sofas in the lobby. And they were big cushions. And I was like, okay, this is going to end up in someone getting hurt and somebody crying. So it seems I should stop it now before that happened. And so I go up to this boy who's the big brother, and I kind of hold the cushion in his hand, and I say, "This looks really fun, but I think the sofa misses the cushion." And the sofa would feel better if it had its cushion back.
That's great.
Right? So I'm not saying to the child, "You're doing something wrong." I'm not criticizing him. I'm joining with him in his experience of play, which is an attempt to normalize things. Look, I'm having a pillow fight with my brother and sister. This is what we would normally do, and that hasn't changed. And as I'm bringing the sofa cushion back together with the boy, the little sister, who was probably 4 years old, said, "Oh, you can't walk here. This trench is where the bad people are. This is where the bad people will come and get you." And I said, "Really? Well, I'm going to do a magic trick. And by my walking through this trench," and as I said this, I put the pillow back on the sofa, "I'm going to transform it into a place for good people."
Wow.
Then I walked through, and I was leaving the H shape, of how the sofas were positioned. So I was leaving kind of what she considered to be her protective zone. And she says, don't go out there. Don't go out there. The bad people are out there. You can only go out there with a soldier.
Wow.
And then her brother said, not just a soldier, but a soldier with a gun. And she said soldier in the masculine. And her brother said it could be a chayelet as long as she had a gun. It could be a female soldier as long as she had a gun.
Do you think these are things that they heard from their parents or from other people when they were being evacuated? I'm not sure if our listeners are aware, but the kids that you're speaking about are kids that were evacuated from these kibbutzim that witnessed all these massacres. So it could be that they saw things or were told things by their parents or by other people. And so this girl is, I guess she's incorporating that into what she's playing.
Yes. And that's very important because it's not just what they saw as they were being evacuated. The number one intervention for acute trauma, and this is very important for people to know, is to drink water. It's a very, very simple thing. And working in inner city Boston with homicide, when I went to this trauma training and they said the most important thing is to drink water, I'm like, what are you talking about? Like,
can you explain
that's
why?
That's really weird. I'm sitting here with a glass of water, but okay.
Okay, kol hakavod. I guess I was right. You are trauma informed. So, when I was in this training and I'm like, what are you serious? Like there's death, there's blood, there's community violence, there's hopelessness. And you're saying the first thing to do is drink water. When we face an acute trauma, the cortisol spills out of our brain in reaction and it floods us and it dehydrates us. So the first thing we need to do is hydrate. So, I was skeptical, but I researched it and it is in fact very true. The thing about people drinking water is it's not just the issue of the cortisol and rehydrating. Dissociation, which is a major response to trauma, is when we separate our mind from our body in order to make what's happening to us more tolerable. But that coping mechanism becomes a dysfunction when we're no longer in the acute situation because
we're not functioning, right?
We're not functioning, right? So it occurred to me that when you are drinking water, you are re-regulating your body. Trauma dysregulates our system within our body. And when you drink, you have to be very intentional about your movements, about what we call the autonomic system. The autonomic system has to be able to put the glass to our lips, sense that it's there, take in the water. And all of that, we have to coordinate our mind, our body, our physical movement, our intention, and our action. And so I always take things a step forward. And so for me, it's not just the issue of the cortisol, it's the issue of us being able to anchor our mind and our body enough so that we can do the action of drinking. And that for me was the number one way in which I formed a connection to people. I could sit in the lobby for hours and I would look around and see who looked alone or triggered or in, what we call activated. Activated means we're in the trauma response mode. And I would simply
get them to drink water?
Not get them.
Okay.
I would hand them a glass of water. And I would say, it's really important to drink water right now. And they would look up at me and with this smile, they would sometimes say, how did you know I was thirsty? Or thank you so much. It was unexpected. And it established that whatever relationship they were going to have with me was going to be an unexpected relationship.
So I wanted to go back to your experience in the 3 different conflict zones of working with kids in Israel and in Northern Ireland and in inner city Boston. And so I assume that there are some unique challenges to each of these places because the conflict is so different in each of them. And then there's also some universal things that, because you've seen kids reacting in so many really different situations in probably very human, similar ways, like what universal things you can extract from that. So I'd love to hear your insights about these places and how you got there.
I think the most important thing I learned in Northern Ireland was, they have many trauma treatment programs, and the Northern Ireland Mental Health Association did a project for 5 years called Journey Toward Healing. And I spoke at their culminating event, their conference, and they gave us a tour of the trauma programs. And one of them, the front of their brochure said, "Whatever you say, say something." And what that means is exactly what we started with. You have to say something. I can't not say something to what Rivka said she's been through. If people feel that if you bring up something, that you're causing the pain. If you talk to somebody about their suicidal feelings, they believe that you might cause them to commit suicide. And those are wrong. And the reason that's so important in Northern Ireland is that because of the conflict, so many secrets had to be kept. And you couldn't talk about it. It's the theme, like the mission of every person in Northern Ireland during the Troubles was say nothing. And so this trauma program has to re-regulate, like the glass of water re-regulates our system. Whatever you say, say something. And that doesn't mean I'm saying, "Oh, what happened to you in the Mamad? How long were you there? Did you see it?" It happened to me at the airport when I was leaving a lot. Kids appeared who I'd worked with. I thought I was done, but then they were at the airport. And there was a guy who came in and said to the mother, "Oh, you went through all this? You saw it? What happened when this happened? What happened when that happened?" And she said, I really am getting triggered talking about this. And I said to the man, "Excuse me, I'm going to have to ask you to leave." That's being an embedded trauma therapist, right? I'm at the airport. I'm always on duty. And I had to protect the mother from his invasiveness, his curiosity, and we can call it trauma porn. Trauma porn is when, people want to know every gory detail. Are you asking the question, are you in it because you're trying to help, because you're trying to understand, because you're trying to support? Or is it your own curiosity? Is it your own entertainment? Those are all universal things. It's like the thing about the water. It's a very simple thing. Whatever you say, say something. When we know something terrible happened, but you don't have to say, how many hours were you in the Mamad and who did you see killed? And, when your father got shot, was there blood all over you? And those are questions people ask, and it's not fair. It's not right. But it's simply to say, you went through something really, really big. You went through something really big that no one expected to happen. And I could never imagine how much you might be feeling right now. You've created a safe space for a conversation. You've created safety and stability, because were I to assume that I knew what to do, I would be violating a trust. Mm-hmm. Because it's hazooey, it's otherworldly, it's beyond proportion. I can't possibly understand. My job isn't to, say, I understand everything you went to. My job is to say, and this is what I do. I say, you're the teacher of me. You're the expert in you. You are the one who knows the most about you. And you have to be a good teacher. If you want me to know how to work with you and how to be with you, be a good teacher and teach me what I need to know. And you're giving the client power. You're giving the client a sense of agency. With that simple statement, you are saying, I have confidence in you. I have confidence in your self-knowledge, even if I don't really have it. By saying it, I'm giving it. I'm giving the confidence. And then they have the power to determine what I'm going to know. And then they can see what I do with it. And if I do things that make them comfortable, then that's going to be trust building. If I do things that make them uncomfortable, that's going to violate the trust. And you know what? You don't always have to do anything. You don't always have to react. You can just say, wow, that's a big story you just told me. That is big.
What did you teach the madrichim, the counselors, to do with the children? What did you focus on with the short time that you must have had?
That's a great question. And I think my answer is going to surprise you, because people kind of picture, a little bit of a cookbook with a recipe. But actually, the thing I found that people needed the most was the ability to be curious. Trauma makes it almost impossible to be curious. Why?
Because we're shut down. We shut down in trauma.
You're shut down in trauma, but also curiosity is about ambiguity. It's about an openness to possibility. And what we want when we're traumatized is to be sure, is to have it be definite and guaranteed. I am going to be safe. I know what the outcome is going to be. And so we make a lot of assumptions. So an example I can give you is, there's a kid who's kicking and punching everybody, including the counselors. And so I say to them, okay, so why do you think that is? And they said, well, clearly they're doing it for attention. And to that, I respond and I say, and this is true, I'm not being tongue in cheek. Do you always know why you do what you do? Because I don't know why I do what I do. And usually when I think about it afterwards, why did I say that? Why did I do that? I knew that wouldn't work, but I reacted. Then I realized there's many, many reasons why people do one thing and react one way. And so the exercise I did with them is to make a circle like it's a pie. And I asked them to list 6 possible reasons why the child did that. And then I asked them to take each of those reasons and attribute it to how big a slice of the pie is that reason. And so it's opening them up to be able to interpret with meaning, not to react, right? Because when we say the kid's doing it for attention, first of all, that's not true. I mean, we all want attention.
Right.
I mean, clearly.
And you're closing it in because you're giving an answer already. I have to tell you that I'm crying. It's so moving, the things that you're saying, because I know that it's fitting in with my mother dying and all that, but it's like curiosity is like hope, because it's the creativity and the options that are open.
What you said is so important. And it brings me to the next point, answering the original question that Rachel asked, what is an embedded therapist? And that is that a moment of crisis is a moment of opportunity. So we can take that moment, which, you were kind of in crisis, like, oh my God, what did I do? I did the wrong thing. And my mother's, it's such a big thing for a small child to have to encounter. And I made a mistake by kind of forcing him to confront this thing that's can't be understood to him because he's so young. But I say the opposite. A moment of crisis is a moment of opportunity. And what that means is that in a crisis, we see that the tools we have don't work, haven't been working. And in that moment, people are willing to change in a way they're not usually willing to change, because they know that the way they've been hasn't been working. But the number one guideline is don't react. Respond first with empathy. Then reflect back your interpretation. And then if boundaries need to be set of some kind, or the situation needs definition, which is a way of creating a boundary. Winnicott talks about You can't be the best mother. You can only be a good enough mother. And that is what saves me, and I think saves all of us, is that otherwise we'd spend all our lives going, oh, what kind of mother am I? Whoever allowed me to have a child? Oy, and then I had grandchildren. What was I thinking? Who let me do that? It's such a big job. It's too big. And I could feel that too. Like, what is the hubris? What is my thinking that this disproportionate event, this otherworldly event, right? Because people talk about October 7th and they use the Hebrew word hazui. And that was a word the Madrichim used a lot, because we're walking around and living day to day with these people. And we'd say, Zemamash hazui, it's delusional. It's otherworldly. It's out of proportion. There's no way to measure it. There's no way to gather it in. But actually, it's a moment of opportunity.
Bring me back to October 7th, because I don't know how that can be an opportunity. It sounds almost like a terrible thing to say. Oh, we'll take it. I mean, obviously, that's what we want to do. But how could...
Well, that's why I work as an embedded therapist. And that's why I'm trauma informed, because the event happened. The event happened. We can't have it not have happened. And a trauma response, the other day someone was telling me about a client she has whose neighbor was killed by her husband, which reminds me of the podcast you did a couple of weeks ago where you had the woman talking about everybody running around with pistols now.
Right.
Is problematic in that regard. But in the situation, your first goal is, if only I'd done this, if only I'd done that, if only I could have, if only they, if only this, if only that. And all of that is a desire to feel like we can control everything. It's a very natural, healthy response, but if only I'd driven this way, if only I hadn't gone to that party, if only I hadn't opened the door, all of those things are out of a desire to believe that there are rules that keep us safe. And if we follow those rules, we will be safe. But the thing is, those rules were all blown out of the water and we can't control everything. So looking at a moment of crisis as a moment of opportunity isn't taking advantage of a horrible thing and benefiting from it. It's working through the horrible thing that happened and using it as an opportunity for skill building, right? So how do you do that? You do that by making meaning and reflecting back. So I'll give you an example of how not to do that. So one of the phenomena of this post-October 7th is that kids in the hotels, the kibbutzim, by October 10th, Hashomer HaTzair had deployed to all the sites of the evacuees. And they just put up an educational system by October 10th. But, Hashomer HaTzair, they led the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. So that's their legacy, is being able to meet the most awful, terrible thing. And that's why when they asked me to come, I didn't even say, what do you want me to do? I was just like, okay, I'm coming, because I know they're going to be doing the right thing. Then when I got there, I was like, okay, wait, what did I say I was going to do here? And then I had to figure it out. So they had educational frameworks. Like I walked in and there was a kibbutz nursery that looked exactly like the nursery on Keturah, but it was in the Red Sea Diving Club.
That's amazing. They built it the same way. That's so clever.
Yes. Because that's healing. That's an anchor of resilience, right? It's a familiar structure and the children know what to do with it. But the story I'm telling, it's very difficult because when children get angry at each other, they say, you're a caca or you're a poo-poo head or you're a pee-pee. And in this situation, children would say to each other when they got angry, your father's been kidnapped and he's going to die and you deserve it.
Oh my gosh.
Right.
You actually heard that, you're saying.
Yeah.
How do you respond when you hear something like that?
Okay, so I'm going to tell you what the wrong response, and this was in giving clinical supervision to the madrichim, to the counselors, someone who was giving them clinical supervision said, oh, in that situation, we have to give hope, and you have to say to the little girl, the country is doing everything it can to get these kidnapped people back, and you have to have hope. And when I was told this, I was outraged, because that doesn't have anything to do with the interaction between the children. That's not the meaning of the interaction.
That's not why they said it was because they were concerned for the safety. They said it for some other reason.
Exactly. And so when children are struggling with each other, they want to say the meanest possible thing you can say, the most shocking thing, because that gives you control. And trauma is about the loss of control. We have to talk about the difference between a trauma and a tragedy. And the way we know the difference between a trauma and a tragedy is that what characterizes trauma is a sense of powerlessness, a lack of control, a sense that the world as we knew it no longer exists, a loss of trust in relationships, an inability to trust. And so when you're an embedded therapist, you have to be under the assumption that the person you're talking to is not going to trust you.
And also, Lisa, I need you to finish the beginning of the thought, and that is, what is the right answer to this kid?
The right answer to that question is, you say to the boy or girl who's saying this thing, wow, I bet you feel really powerful when you say something like that. And when you see that people are shocked and stop what they're doing. And we all want to feel powerful. We all want to feel like we have some control. What are ways we can be powerful and have control without having to be so hurtful? Let's talk about that. So you're showing empathy for the need to have control. You're not saying, don't be rude. How can you say that? That's a terrible thing to say, because if we do that, we're missing the opportunity to reflect back that we understand the purpose of the action, and we miss the opportunity for the skill building to reflect on more pro-social, more productive ways to handle our desire for power and control. But all of that comes from a trauma-informed way. And it also comes from my experience, where I say, if people don't tell me they hate me and want to kill me, at least once a week, I feel like I'm not doing my job.
Sorry.
Not just kids, adults that I work with homicide, they've lost a loved one to homicide. They often witness the most terrible, brutal things. And so they want to have power and control. And so, they swear at me, and they tell me they want to kill me, and they tell me they hate me. And I work with people of color who don't trust white people for very good reasons. And not only that, I'm a mental health professional who a lot of people don't trust mental health professionals. And I was sitting with a father who said, everything is gone. Everything I created in my life was destroyed on October 7th. And I said, have you talked to anybody? And he said, oh, you mean a therapist? And I said, yeah. And he said, oh, yeah, they try really hard. He said, I feel sorry for them because they just do not have the capacity to help. They haven't been trained for this. They don't know.
I'm sure a lot of therapists have not, they don't have the experience that you have of dealing with really high conflict zones. And I think, all of us feel really ill-equipped to deal with these things. Why would a regular therapist have been trained in dealing with a horrible massacre? It's not something we expect to encounter in our day-to-day jobs.
Right. And so what I said to him, because the parallel process there is, were I not experienced, a comment like that would paralyze me. That he's like throwing out a gauntlet. You think you're going to be able to help me, which may be the fact that I didn't walk around with the tag identifying me as a therapist helped in this situation.
He was speaking to you. He didn't know that you were a therapist?
People knew I was something.
Okay.
They knew I was something like that, but I wasn't, like the other people. And I said to him, if they were able to help you and understand you, what is it that they would say? What is the question they would ask or the reaction they would have? And he subsequently went on to talk for 2 hours.
Wow.
Oh, wow.
And all I did was reflect back. I said, this is, Hazui. This whole thing feels otherworldly. And who could possibly understand in this moment what you went through? But tell me, what is it that they would ask?
I have to add to this that I'm reading Elizabeth Kubler-Ross just now, and she started out before she got to the 5 stages of what we feel when we're in grief and mourning. What she actually did was she interviewed patients that were dying and asked them, what is it you want? And what she wanted to learn from them. That's how the whole thing started. She sat with patients. Everyone thought she was crazy. And, this was kind of like no one was letting her talk to patients. But that's how it all started. She talked to patients and said, you tell me what I can learn from you. So that's actually what you were doing. You were telling him, you tell me.
And that is my approach. Counselors would say to me who were coming new and just starting their deployment would say to me, what do I say to a child? What do I ask them? I said, who said you have to say anything? Why do you think you have to say something? The number one goal is to be present, lihiyot nochach, to be there. And to be trustworthy is to make no assumption, is to come in there like, what is it? Is it Rabbi Nachman Mibratslav who talks about coming in with a pure heart, like a clean slate? When I go to court with people in Boston, who are getting in trouble with the law, if it's an adolescent, usually it's an adolescent, and the judge will say, who do you have here with you today? And I know that it's very important to not have kids go to court alone or a kid in their family, because when the judge knows that you have caring people with you, then he knows there's a greater possibility that you'll be safe and you won't reoffend. So that was part of my internalized thing. Who do I have here with me? And there were many people. All the clients I've ever seen were with me, saying, okay, Lisa, remember when you did this wrong? Don't do it again. But most importantly, it was my Tante Zenya, who escaped from the Warsaw Ghetto. And she was a psychoanalyst. And she said, you have to know every theory. It's your duty to be diligent, knowing every theory. And then when you walk into the clinical space, you have to forget everything you know and let the client teach you.
Thank you so much, Lisa Fliegel, for being here with us today. What we've shared has been so insightful, and your dedication and vision is really so inspirational.
I just hope that, like the man who said, no one can help, no one can understand, I hope that, our conversation here is helping people be curious, is helping people feel okay. We never know what to do. Why would you know what to do? And for that not to paralyze you, but saying, what could I possibly do for this child, for this friend, for this parent, for, anyone, is to say, it's normal for me to have this sense of helplessness and ignorance, but who's with me? Who do I have with me here today in my heart and in my mind that will help me? And I think, Rivka, you made it clear that you always have your mother with you.
Wow. Thank you so much.
I also want to thank our listeners for tuning in today. By listening to this podcast and by giving women's voices your attention, you give them power. If you, like us, agree that women's perspectives are essential to the Israeli narrative, subscribe to the Voices of Women at Wartime wherever you get your podcasts, and encourage your friends to listen and subscribe too. And if you have thoughts, questions, or comments, we'd love to hear from you. You can reach out to us on social media on the Center for Women's Justice page, on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or wherever. Also, if you'd like to dedicate a podcast in someone's memory or someone's honor, please be in touch with us and we'll give you details about that.
Thank you, Rabbi Scott Kahn, for the recording and editing. I'm Rivka Lubitch, and I was here with Rachel Stomel. Be well and stay safe, and be thankful for all you have and for the loving people around you.